Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this new edition of the Exponential Blueprint. Today, we are going to talk about board excellence, and I'm privileged to have with me Patrick Dunne. Patrick Dunne is a board chair and a board expert. And Patrick, how are you today?
Yeah, very good, very good.
Okay. Now, Patrick, I had the privilege to meet Patrick more than 10 years ago while I was doing my Financial Times Board Director program. A few words about the Exponential Blueprint. I am the founder of the newsletter. I'm a CFO expert as well as a board director, board director by profession as well. I've been chairman of a number of boards. I've been an executive director and a financial executive. And currently, my main activity is mergers and acquisition. Now, the Exponential Blueprint is trusted by more than 22,000 founders, investor, and chief executive. And with this video, I wanted to really thank everyone who is actually contributing to the newsletter. All your comments are really, really welcome. And in the link below, you're going to be able to subscribe to the newsletter to join all these people. And you're very welcome to this journey. So let's come to today. First of all, let me leave the floor to Patrick. So Patrick can actually explain about his current activity, his history, how much experience he's gained with board and with so many other activities, and also philanthropic activities and the books as well. Go ahead, Patrick.
Great. Well, I'll try and be brief on that. So, I'm a mathematician by background. Started life in the chemicals industry in operations research, sort of mathematical modeling type jobs. Then moved into private equity with a very international private equity firm, 3i Group PLC, which was interesting because apart from being involved in venture, growth capital, buyouts, and that private equity world, it was also a public company. So one of the UK's top 100 companies in the FTSE 100. I spent the bulk of my career there, ending up on the operating committee of 3i. But during that time, I had a sort of awakening moment fairly early on in my career, actually, where I was in charge of a workout portfolio and went to a really appalling board meeting. And that really got me thinking about, well, what makes a good board and what makes a good board director? And also thinking about our own business. How do we train people to be on boards and how do we pick the right people and how do we develop them as well? And that led to the creation of an activity within the business and various other things, including being asked to take part in what was then a seminal governance review for the UK, the Higgs review, which came up with the senior independent director and led to the creation of the 30% Club. 3i was a great place to work, apart from the immense sort of learning. You also had, if they wanted to keep you, freedom to serve on other boards, as long as obviously they didn't conflict with the business in any way. So I had the great opportunity to serve on a number of boards while I was at 3i. And so when I retired, um, I already had a small portfolio. Today, I have a number of activities. So I chair the Royal Voluntary Service in the UK. I have a business called Board Delta, which does board advisory and training work, including the partnership I have with the Financial Times, which Matteo mentioned. Um, I also have founded a number of social sector organizations, including ESSA in Africa, which I chair today, which is working on big systemic issues in African education. So I spent a lot of time in Africa. I'm also a visiting professor at Cranfield University. I've written a number of books. Boards is probably the least imaginative title, but that's probably the one that people will know of me for. And more recently, I co-authored with Rebecca Robbins a book about five generations at work, largely because I was getting fed up with the discourse that was taking place around intergenerational working, which to me seemed very reductive and divisive. When I thought, isn't it fantastic that we've got all these different generations in the workforce, and why can't we make that into an opportunity rather than grumble about micro differences in perspective and so on. So the book is a lot about what companies around the world are doing to maximize the opportunity that affords. I live in London. Probably 70% of what I do is outside the UK, though, including Africa, as I've already mentioned. And I have three fantastic boys. And any day now, I'll have my second granddaughter to be with and support. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Patrick. It was such a great introduction from you. The range of activity you described really, effectively explain how precious your advice can be to so many, and this is how, and obviously how precious this podcast would be to so many people who are looking also to become better board directors as well. Let me come to the, you know, to the agenda today. So we're gonna cover. It's going to be divided into seven parts. The first one is going to be some introductory background about how to be a board director. The second one is we're going to dive straight into how we can we can see how a board can become effective effectively. So we can see how to be a very strong performing board director. Then we're going to look at director duties and liabilities, the structure and remuneration, the audit, financial reporting and oversight. Then we're going to look into risk management, internal controls, and then culture, chairmanship, and dynamics in general. So let me start with an introduction about really what happens during the board life. Now, the question is, you've chaired multiple boards across so many sectors. Um, Now, when it comes to governance, yeah, what was the magic moment that led you to say, well, this is really what I need to do. This is my was going to be my activity to improve how, for example, governance is executed in businesses in general. And after that magic moment, what was the evolution overall over the years?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I was probably over promoted early on, and so I felt very ignorant, and I felt quite vulnerable. Did I really have what it took to this job? And then the first board meeting I went to as part of this job, I'd been to other board meetings before, was a family company where we had, I think it was a 15% stake, so a small minority stake. We didn't have a board seat, we just had an observer rights. And the company was in difficulty. And what struck me in this board meeting was they had no clarity of purpose. I couldn't understand why this family owned this company anymore. It didn't have a good succession opportunity. The strategy was all over the place, so there was no clarity of purpose of the business as well as why they should own it. They were completely misaligned on pretty well everything. They just were arguing the whole time. Uh, and so I thought, well, even if they had clarity of purpose, um, it'd be very difficult to keep that alignment because there's no alignment. They really don't like each other. They really don't respect each other. It would be difficult. And then I thought they don't have the right people. So their level of self-awareness was really low. They they didn't have what I thought it would take to get out of the situation that we're in. So you had a purpose issue, you had a people issue, and then with regards to the board processes, pretty well every aspect was challenged. So I wasn't sure they had the right agenda. Papers were really poor and not very informative. The management of the meeting by the chair wasn't great. Um, and it was very hard when you looked at board minutes to see whether they actually followed anything up. So I drew a triangle during the meeting, and it was purpose, people, process. And I thought I had a portfolio of 65 investments to look after. I thought actually, you know, if we really want to make more money, recover value from this portfolio, and we want to reduce the hassle that we have, because underperforming companies for an investor are generally quite a lot of hassle, then actually, if we get the board sorted out, we might be able to maximize the potential value creation and minimize the potential hassle. So that was my sort of moment, if you like. And then I went back and I discussed with my boss, when we make an investment, what do we say to the board about what we think they should be doing? What's our role where we're actually on the board? How do we contribute to that? And when we pick people to be our nominee directors or representatives, what's the criteria and how do we select them? And so I was just generally sort of ignorant and inquisitive. Um, and I think that's a very good sense, not unconfident, but I think humility is really important for non-executives generally. And I think in that moment, I think that feeling and that sense of humility actually was a fantastic thing to have, because it led me to ask questions which perhaps other people thought, well, that's pretty obvious, although it wasn't. That they would feel embarrassed if they asked. I wasn't embarrassed at all to ask those questions, and it led to great things. So in terms of how my philosophy evolved, I'll be brief because I'm sure we'll come back to these bits, but that basically led me to think you have to be always learning. The art and the science of being a board member develops, moves on. And you just look at the last 5 years, how many things have changed in the way that boards operate, in the way that the context has changed, and so on. So I always had this philosophy of, I'll never know everything I need to know, and I still don't. I've been a chair for 20 odd years, and I still, constantly learning all the time. And I think you have to have that there. The second thing is to understand that there are really good general principles which seem to hold true for lots of different situations and lots of different times and with lots of different people. But the context always provides uh, an important um, backdrop and driver of how you do things. So you may have a general principle, but how you're actually going to bring about the thing that you want to see brought about will depend very much on the context. And most important in that context are the characters that are on the board now or that you're going to get on the board. The people dynamics are really critical. So yeah, I suppose that in summary is kind of what first drew me to governance, and also how my philosophy has changed, and how that's changed with different experiences, different cultures, different types of organization, different situations.
Now, thank you so much, Patrick. And what I really appreciate here is the framework of structure and the simplicity. Even though each situation is unique, we will always have to go through
Hmm.
endless iteration. But you mentioned about the three P, people, processes, and purposes. Basically, it's just where just to remind myself what Steve Jobs says. Like, if you can turn complexity into simplicity, you can move mountains. And I suppose in an
Hmm.
ever-changing world, like, in so many different situations with so many different boards, so many different companies, yeah, trying to apply a simple structure can only be helpful. So, that leads me nicely to the next question. I wanted to ask you this. Can you share a pivotal moment? Again, something that really you just remember in your career where there was a major change in the organization because of a bold decision. Whether it's something that created a positive change or whether there's something that created a negative change.
Yeah, well, there have been so many of both
Tell us just
over
one.
the years. I think I would zone in on the board's relationship with the executive, and in particular, the chair's relationship with the CEO. And the decision that every chair uh, has to be conscious of is, you know, have we got the right formulation of the leadership team? And have we got the right CEO for this phase of development? And uh, I've been incredibly lucky. I mean, ESSA being a case in point with appointing people into their first CEO role. So I know some chairs will feel that, actually it's always better to appoint someone who's got a lot of experience because, that plays safe. There's less potential reputational risk for the chair if you appoint, someone who's been proven. But I focus a lot on the circumstances of the organization and what I feel is needed for that next development phase. So in ESSA, uh, we're only 10 years old, but we've had two CEOs to this point, both of whom have done a fantastic job, both of whom were very different in terms of what they brought and in the end what they delivered. And the first one was fantastic for that startup phase. Um, the second one, really good for developing the organizational um, structure, capabilities, processes, all of that. They're a fantastic job. And so I think that's true. I think when you assume a chair role, um, the sequencing of when the chair retires and when the CEO retires is really quite important to get right. And so I remember in another organization, I won't name it, where um, a CEO was appointed. I didn't feel reasonably quickly they were the right person. Um, but you want to support them, give them the opportunity to prove that they are, but that wasn't really happening. And so you have to deal with that. And it's not easy for a lot of people, um, board members who wanted that person to be appointed in the first place, have supported them, and maybe feel it's sort of a failure on their part. Um, my overwhelming principle with these things is what is best for the organization, and the degree of social awkwardness that surrounds a change of leadership is a price well worth paying to have the right CEO. Now, you may make that choice wrong, you may make that judgment wrong, but I think as long as you genuinely believe you're doing what you think is best for the organization, and you have a fair process, and you have a rigorous process, and you have an inclusive process, then that's what you should be doing as a chair. That's an important part of your job. I think one of the things I think that in taking over the chair role at the Royal Voluntary Service just about year and a half ago, one of the things that the organisation had been through a period of challenge because of COVID. It lost a significant proportion of its income for several years because of COVID. Yet the demand for what it did rose dramatically. It was very stretched, and there was a kind of weariness, if I could put it that way. And I thought the organization was just brimming with potential, that it had a lot of opportunities and it has some great people. Um, and I thought the board could be more optimistic. It's very hard if you're battered down by losing, pretty much half your income for several years for you to be optimistic like that. So I would not criticize the former board at all. I think they were battle weary. And so I think in that case, it's really a board decision to be more positive, to be more optimistic, to actually take a little bit more risk in terms of investing in opportunities. And that's what we've been doing. And we're now in a reasonably good position, rebuilding our reserves. We're ahead of income pre-COVID now. And we've added to the team. We've invested in technology, which had been lacking, various things. Now, the proof of the pudding will be, you know, probably after I finish being chair as to whether those decisions were really good. But touch wood, so far, so good. We haven't got everything right, but I think there's lots of promise and there's lots of potential, and the organisation has a vim and a vigor about it that's quite encouraging.
Thank you so much, Patrick, and also telling us about the current situation, the current activities going on, and what I picked particularly as a very useful lesson for all of us. Well, two lessons. First of all, the separation between the CEO and the chairman, where we see the chairman managing the board and the CEO managing the business. That's a very, very important distinction. And that's where we tend to see founders really struggling to become a CEO, let alone having an independent board of directors. The other thing which is very important for many who are listening is how you deal with change. Now, we know that businesses go different type of phases. A startup is not like a scale up. A scale up is not like a stagnation. A stagnation is not like crisis. Crisis is not like exit. As we know, there are five phases, in which really behaviors change, and success is only possible if we are willing to pivot. And as you rightly mentioned, Patrick, it's also about wealth creation as well as wealth management. Because we got too many situations where education about wealth management is overwhelming, but you also have to be passionate about the wealth creation process. So thank you so much for your insightful view on this.
Yeah.
Let me know. Sorry, go ahead,
I
Patrick.
was going to say just one thing to add. One of the things I think is important about that relationship between the board and the executive and the chair and the CEO in particular is to think of it like a Venn diagram, or actually a series of Venn diagrams where you don't want to be in a parallel universe where there's no real connection. You don't want to be trying to do each other's jobs so the circles are overlapping. Where you want to be is in the middle where you have a really nice intersection between the two circles, and that will change, as you've pointed out, depending on the stage of development, the context, and so on. So I think it's flexible, but the most important thing is you talk about it. So you talk about these things with the CEO. Is this one that needs to go to the board or not? Do you need a bit of support on that for a short period from a board member? Those kinds of things. So it's a flexible Venn diagram, if you like. But that intersection's got to be constructive, and actually, the CEO and the chair are responsible for managing that intersection.
Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, your endless experience obviously is allows us really to look at so many different situations, so many different lessons from which we can all benefit. And yeah, I mean, the structure is really, really fundamental. And that's where evolution, a business needs to evolve. And
Mm.
it's a very important part of really being successful. You go through different phases, successes and failure. So talking about failure, talking about success, board effectiveness is really center stage when it comes to any discussion about any success or any failure. We can be as educated as we would like to be. We can be as experienced as we like to be, but eventually it's execution that makes a business success or fail effectively. Yeah. Um, Now, within board effectiveness, I would like to ask you this question, Patrick. What are, in your experience or in your opinion, either of those, the three most common reason why boards become ineffective?
Yeah. Well, I think the overarching thing is boards are ineffective when they make the wrong decisions. Uh, and we all make decisions which go wrong because circumstances change, we didn't have the information, whatever. But if you look at the three underlying reasons why we make wrong decisions, I think I go back to my little triangle that we don't have clarity of purpose about what we want the
Mhm.
company to become or to be. We don't have clarity around, the purpose of the board and the purpose of the exec, so there's a muddle there. So there's a purpose kind of reason, if you like. There's a people reason because we don't have the right people and they aren't working together in the right way. Or we might have the right people and they aren't working together in the right way. Those two things are equally important, I think, as we see in the world of sport. You can have what looks like a great team sheet, glittering stars, individuals, but they don't work as a team. So you have to have that combination. And it's more complex than that because they also have to work as effectively with the executive group. So that's important. Um, Also within that people bit, you can have the influence of stakeholders can be tremendously helpful or can be tremendously destructive. Uh, and so, the chair in particular needs to be conscious of, have we got the right stakeholder strategy and all the rest of it. So there's a set of people things. And then process, I think, if you haven't got a good process for making decisions, if it's ineffective and inefficient, um, if it's inefficient, it will become ineffective because people get grumpy when it's inefficient, you don't use your time to best effect. At the moment, in a world where we are bombarded with issues to deal with, um, we don't have control over many things which will influence our future, and that seems to be growing, that list of
Mhm.
things. Um, then you really need to use your time well. You really need to focus and you really need to be well informed. So I go back to those three common reasons: lack of purpose or clarity of purpose or alignment of purpose. You haven't got the right people working together in the right way, and actually you just don't have good process.
Thank you for reminding about this simplicity, the people, processes, and purposes, because again, simplicity always wins. And your description about the imperfect world is where so many will draw lessons. Yeah, because too many people think, oh well, I need to wait for perfect situation to take the right decision. Well, it doesn't happen like that. Never. You
Yeah,
always
there's
have
a
to.
yeah, and there's a very good example at the moment where many boards are wrestling with should we adopt dynamic budgeting instead of the classic ritualized approach. So that sounds like it's a process issue, but it's also a people issue. Do we have the right people, the right board, as well as the right executive to enable us to use dynamic budgeting effectively? And actually, what is the point of doing that? And the point of that may be that we are more resilient, but also we are better able to maximize opportunities. So rather than waiting till we find out, if we set things up so that we know what we will do if we have more cash, if we don't have as much cash, if we have those hires in, or if we don't have those hires in, if our competitors do this or they don't, then we'll be a bit ahead of the game. We'll be more agile.
Thank you, Patrick. And this is where uh, so many will draw a few more lessons about this. It's about the dynamic world in which we will live. Effectively, a business will start obviously with the risk. Someone will have to take a risk to start a business, but it will have to live with risks forever. So you always have to constantly calculate managing risk.
Hmm.
You always have to take trade-off decision. Yeah, that's there are countless issues, and obviously it's only human intelligence, by the way, that can deal with this. Because many will say,
Yeah,
okay, well, we need to get artificial intelligence to help. So that's not going to really help us because those decisions are really driven by a snapshot that is never going to be perfect, effectively.
yeah.
um, so that leads me to another question to you. Now, in your experience, we always hear about high
Hmm.
performing board, and then we hear about just just that. a situation where there's no such a performance because we just can see like, people sometimes people they call it like, rubber stamp or ticking box. Now, what in your experience, what separate the one from the other one? What separates the good performance from the non-performance or the low performance, should we say? Yeah.
So I think Warren Bennis it was who said, vision is the ability, power is the ability to convert vision into reality. So for me, a high-performing board is one that's enabled to create a reality from the vision that it has. So, if you look at those great businesses, great social organizations, great boards in the public sector, they've been able to take an idea, take a vision of something they want to see achieved and make it happen. And they do that through not just making the right decisions, through implementing those decisions in the most effective way. Many boards, are composed of fantastically bright people, and they may decide, this is the right thing to do, but can they create a culture in the organization, have the right leadership team, the right governance to enable that to happen? So when you look at the role of the board, I always think, assuming the vision is clear and agreed, then the role of the board is to ensure you've got the right strategy, the right resources, and the right governance. And that's what separates high performing boards from box ticking ones. Box ticking ones may be too focused on the governance box, um, and they're focused on satisfying, you know, a wide range of people who and they sort of are too led by that. The high performing boards, I think, do what they think is the right thing for the organization to achieve its vision. They have a really good stakeholder strategy that's integrated. They're not just being pulled around by the shareholders today, the customers tomorrow, the staff next week. It's properly balanced and integrated. Um, Ultimately, what separates high performing boards from the others is the quality of the leadership of the chair and of the CEO. Those two, if you get those two characters right, and they fit with what you're trying to achieve, then you're more likely to be successful. So I hope that's not too rambly, but I think it's about, making the right decisions, but converting them into reality, not just taking the decision.
Thank you, Patrick. In particular, one of the main characteristic of a board is how he acts as a hub in between the business, in between so many stakeholders. Stakeholders could be internal or external. So it's really so educational to hear about your description about what makes a board performing well, compared to just a situation where there's oversight and nothing else. Now, we
Yeah,
need absolutely both. We need absolutely both.
yeah.
Are you able to share a case study where there was a board turnaround, so a complete change of governance, and what was the reason why this had to happen and how it happened?
Yeah, it'll be anonymous, but it's
That's okay.
a case study. Um, it was an organization that was losing customers, didn't have the right people, was in the wrong premises, was running out of money fast, had lost its credibility with key stakeholders in its market. And the turnaround came, first of all, a new chair was appointed to sort it out, basically.
Mhm.
Um, the first thing they did was really think hard about whether the organization was savable. So, is this worth saving? Can it be saved? And think about what sort of executive leader it needed to bring about that turnaround. and at the same time think about what sort of board it needed to achieve that turnaround. At the same time, because it was running out of money, it needed the continuing support of its financial backers, so bank, equity holders. And so the chair was someone of great credibility, not me. It was a different person. And they were able to speak to the financial backers and say, look, I think it's salvageable for these reasons. I think this is going to take a bit of time. So that was wise not to promise too much. I think I need to appoint an interim CFO very quickly so we can understand what the real financial position is now and also what the financial dynamic is so we can understand how much we can invest from existing resources or not, what costs we have to save, and so on. One of the things he had spotted was he thought the pricing, which had been left the same for a long time, there wasn't an up-to-date pricing model. And he felt actually maybe through changing pricing, which is difficult when you're in difficulty, might actually be a solution. There hadn't been for some time a customer profitability analysis. So there were various things he thought, if this business had a really good CFO, these things would be in place. They're not in place. Financial control was weak as well. But the key thing was what is the what are the characteristics, criteria of the leader, the executive leader that we want? He was incredibly fortunate. He used a search firm, but very quickly they focused on people who were available very quickly. So there was a small pool, and they had a rigorous process. They didn't rush it. They picked a fantastic CEO, and she came in and brought. She had a lot of ideas about what you could do with the business, uh, as well as was very motivational with existing staff. So she dealt with underperformers. There wasn't really a performance culture. She decided what culture she wanted in the organization, got the board's, full support for that, which meant some uncomfortable changes of people who'd been in position for quite a while, but they supported her in making those changes. Some of them were risky because of their people's position in the market and so on. And bit by bit, over the course of the next, I'd say 2 to 3 years, the organization was absolutely transformed, has become very high performing. Interestingly, the next issue, the board has changed since, there's a chair retired. The CEO is probably not too far away from retirement now. And so the big issue is, is about leadership succession at the moment. But that was a very nice thing to. I was on the board, after the CEO was appointed as part of the new board, but it was a great thing to see. So a lot of the hard work was done before I arrived, but it was really good to see that. Almost a textbook kind of how do you turn something around if you have the time to do it. You don't always get the time.
Patrick, it's such a pleasure to see about the way you describe this, because all the time we say that when you go to the internet, when you go to social media, when you go to LinkedIn and many places, or even when you network, there is so much information everywhere. We're overwhelmed with the information, but transformation is rare. And to hear about transformation story is so it's such a great lesson for everyone. I like the way you stress on the quality of leadership. How leadership can actually drive productivity, how leadership can transform a business, and in particular because I'm a CFO by trade, of course, how the right CFO can really help, how the passion for the wealth creation process can be married with the discipline, and so passion and discipline together can help you really win much more than just a game. I always say passion just
Yeah,
will win one game.
it's interesting. I mean, at ESSA, our values are they actually reflect the name. So they're evidence-based, solutions-focused, strengthening trust, and always learning. And I think if a board has, it's making decisions which are evidence-based, you don't always have the evidence you need, but they're evidence-based. Um, if you are solutions focused, so you're not just focused on what's gone wrong, you're focused on actually, so how can we change that? How can we make that better? How can we take advantage of, a challenge as opposed to be consumed and negative about the challenge? Trust is much underrated as without trust, it's very hard to get things done. I've just written a LinkedIn article all about trust, and it's massively important for me that a good chair will try and engender a culture of trust amongst the board and trust between the board and the and the executive and with with key stakeholders. Um, I think that always learning for me is really, really important. Never think you know everything there is to know about something. There's always new insights, new information. Things are changing. You need to keep current. You need to keep on it. You need to be actively open-minded about things. And so I think those are really important ingredients of transforming organizations.
Now, thank you about mentioning about learning. Now, learning, continuous iteration. Yeah, that's what we experience in order to be better and better. So, thank you
Yeah.
so much for stressing on those things. That they're really, really fundamental. No, we never stop learning because each business situation is unique. There's never going to be a perfect situation or an imperfect situation.
Yeah.
Um, as a last thing, I wanted to ask you this when it comes to body effectiveness. Now,
Mm.
when things they start to look wrong, yeah. So, what warning sign should executives and investors look for? So, what is the early warning that people should detect when a board is heading towards dysfunction of failure, outright failure, in your view?
Yeah, so in the board book, I make a point early on of saying actually how important self-awareness is. So a board that isn't self-aware, both at an individual and a collective level, that's a sign. Because if they're not really aware of their strengths, their capabilities, the context that they're in, then they will probably make the wrong decisions. So the level of self-awareness, I think, is really important. I think arrogance is. I did another LinkedIn article on this. It was called "Arrogance is the Judgment Slayer." Um, Arrogance really undermines judgment. It can be hard when you've had a period of success not to have those growing feelings of overconfidence. But you really are very vulnerable, I think, when you've had a period of success, and you really need to look out for, the rocks that you might not see because you're looking beyond. So I think self-awareness, I think arrogance, I think a lack of trust. I know as an investor, if I was sitting with the management team I'd always look at the CFO's face when the CEO was talking. And if the CEO was, bigging things up a bit too much, usually it would be all over the CFO's face. They weren't quite going, "Ah," but you could see the discomfort. I've said this many times, so for those of you that heard this before, I apologize. But my grand told me something very important when I was a small boy, which was that it's really important to listen to what people say, but it's even more important to listen to what they think. And if you can, imagine what's in the thought bubbles when people are speaking. So if you're an executive, an investor, and you're looking at, you're hearing a board member speak, take a moment to think, well, I wonder what they actually think. Do they really think what they're saying? And if there's a big gap between those two things, then worry. Um, if they're brushing off something that's significant, worry. If they're not actually taking account of good fortune as opposed to good judgment, worry. If they take credit for things which actually were nothing to do with them, but were just, fortunate outcome, worry. That's a warning sign for me.
Thank you so much. And the interaction between the board directors, as you said, it really helps us to read really what's going on. And again, it's not something that is written on any books. It's something that you experience live when you're in the room. It's about reading the room, and obviously that's a priceless lesson you're giving us about this.
I mean,
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead, yeah, Patrick.
I was going to say finally, if you're saying what three characteristics do you think really good board members need to have? I'd say great judgment, superb interpersonal skills, and fantastic antennae. And it's that antennae that informs the judgment.